Are you tired, my friend? Are your shoulders slumped from carrying burdens you do not need to carry? Come, rest your head here upon this ancient ground, and let us walk back in time together. Let us speak of the ancient builders whose bones are now dust and whose grand cities are swallowed by the forest. You are welcome here. Come, let us wander among the long dead. Their spirits are kind and will not harm you. Listen to the quiet flow of rivers over smooth stones and the birds wheeling overhead as they ride the currents of the air. In the distance, the sun climbs higher and higher, touching the tops of ancient trees with gold and painting the sky with streaks of rose and lavender. It is a new day in the Valley of the Sun, a place where the river widens and turns like water in a great basin. And on the far side, across a stretch of land so wide it seems to go on forever, stands an enormous earthen mound. It has been many hundreds of years since men toiled to make it, piling dirt and clay into a great cone. But even after all this time, its purpose is clear. When the tribes of the South Wind came to this place many lifetimes ago, they named it the Place of the Dawn. That was when they first saw it. A monument so large it seemed like a mountain, but made by human hands. They knew that their ancestors had raised it to catch the first light of the rising sun. The people who made these mounds were called the Mississippian, a name given to them by the Smithsonian Institute, which seeks to classify every tribe and nation that ever lived on this land. They lived here between 800 CE and 1600 CE. For over 700 years, they grew corn and squash and beans in the rich soil of the Mississippi River Valley. They hunted deer and buffalo and elk and kept towns and villages throughout the fertile lands. But then something happened. Why? No one knows. Perhaps there was a drought or a sickness or a war with another tribe. Whatever the reason, around the year 1400, the Mississippians packed up their belongings and most of them moved away. Some went north to Illinois and others traveled east to Tennessee. Eventually, they would spread out across the southeast, blending into other tribes until their culture was gone, leaving no trace behind except a few earthen mounds. Those mounds were more than just burial places for their greatest chiefs. They were temples to the sun god, built to catch his rays at the solstices and equinoxes. The Mississippians worshipped the sun as a god. They believed he gave them life and warmth and watched over them from his home in the heavens. So they built great mounds to honor him, aligning them with the sun's path across the sky. Some mounds are shaped like the head of a bird with its wings outstretched, ready to take flight into the heavens. Others are shaped like the body of a snake, coiled tight and ready to strike. But the largest mound, the one in the center of the Valley of the Sun, is shaped like a pyramid. It rises 100 feet above the plain, hiding for smaller mounds at its base. Now we are going to step back in time. We are going to pretend that we are walking in the footsteps of those ancient people, and we are going to see what life was like when the Mississippian lived in this valley. You can hear the drums beating in the distance, and that means it's time to start our journey back in time. Let's listen to the old stories and learn what we can about the Mississippian people. We don't have much to go on, only some pottery shards, a few arrowheads, bits of charcoal from their cooking fires, and the faint outlines of their houses and streets. But if we piece these clues together like a puzzle, we can see the picture of a proud and peaceful people. Archaeologists found traces of their villages throughout the valleys and lowlands of the southeast. But their greatest city was here in the Valley of the Sun. They settled along the river near its mouth, where the river widened and turned like water in a great basin. On the opposite bank stood an enormous earthen mound. Its purpose was unknown to them, but they guessed it must be very important because nothing else had been found like it. They called the place Cahokia, after one of the many nations that once lived here, but the locals called it the place of the dawn. They said the tribes of the south wind had built it to catch the first light of the rising sun, and it was so big it looked like a mountain. They knew the ancestors had built it to honor the Great Spirit who lived in the heavens, the one they called the Sky Father. So now we are going to climb to the top of this great mound. This is the biggest man-made structure north of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. To build it, thousands of people spent decades piling dirt and clay into a huge cone. Then, when it was finished, some of them stood on top and watched the sunrise every morning. That way, they could tell if the Sky Father was angry or pleased. Every day, the sun god travels across the sky in his great canoe. He paddles furiously to keep the world alive and warm. Sometimes he stops paddling to rest, and that is when the seasons change. When he takes his vacation, the weather turns cold, and everyone must hide in their houses until he starts paddling again. In order to keep track of the seasons, the priests used the mound to mark the days. They watched the sun rise over the horizon and recorded its position. When the sun touched the edge of the mound, it was the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. When the sun did not reach the top of the mound, it was winter, the shortest day of the year. And when the sun touched the middle of the mound, it was an equinox, the days and nights equal in length. If the sun god was angry, they would know it. If his face was hidden behind clouds, crops would fail and winter would last too long. If lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the ground, the people knew the sun god was furious. If a terrible storm hit during planting season, the Sky Father was punishing them. They also knew that when the Sky Father paddled over the tallest trees, it was a sign of peace and prosperity. Here at the summit of the mound, the priests held ceremonies to honor the sun god. They sang and danced, and beat drums, and offered gifts to show their devotion. They wore special clothes and jewelry made of feathers and beads, and painted their faces with symbols of the sun. The Mississippians were not warlike, but they did defend themselves against enemies who came from the north. They fought the Hopewell tribe over hunting grounds, and the remains of their battles can still be seen today, scattered among the mounds. When the priests weren't watching the sunrise, they farmed the land. The Mississippi River Valley was one of the most fertile areas in North America. They grew corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, sunflowers, and tobacco. They also hunted deer and wild turkeys and gathered nuts and berries in the forest. In the evenings, the villagers gathered in the central plaza to tell stories and sing songs. The men would sit in a circle and talk about the hunt, while the women prepared food over small fires. The children played at their feet, listening to every word. The Mississippians were experts at making pottery, and they decorated their bowls and cups with images of the sun god. They wove mats and baskets from reeds and sedge and made clothing from deerskin. The men made tools and weapons from stone and bone, and the women wove blankets and robes from plant fibers. They were a peaceful people who lived in harmony with nature. They believed that everything in the universe was connected, the trees and rivers and animals and humans. They respected all living things and never wasted anything. But around the year 1400, something happened that caused them to abandon their homes and flee. Perhaps there was a drought, or a sickness, or a war with another tribe. Whatever the reason, they packed up their belongings, and most of them moved away. Some went north to Illinois, and others traveled east to Tennessee. Eventually, they would spread out across the southeast, blending into other tribes until their culture was gone, leaving no trace behind except a few earthen mounds. We don't know what happened to them, but we can learn from their example. The Mississippians were a proud and peaceful people who valued nature and the balance of the universe. They teach us that we can live in harmony with each other and the natural world. As the sun sinks below the horizon, we can see the bright lights of the city in the distance. The stars are coming out now, and soon it will be dark. We should probably find somewhere safe to sleep before we get lost in the woods. This is an old Native American legend. Do you believe it? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Thanks, bye. As I said in the last episode, we're going to be spending some time exploring the history of the Mississippians, a culture that thrived in the Mississippi River Valley around 800 years ago. But before we jump into their history, I thought it would be fun to spend this first episode talking about the land they inhabited, and not just the land in general, but specifically the way that the land they inhabited shaped their day-to-day lives and their beliefs about the world around them. So let's do that. Welcome to the first episode of Foundations, a series dedicated to providing a foundational overview of various historical civilizations around the world. In this episode, we'll be exploring the land of rivers and plains that the Mississippians called home. If you were to fly over the Mississippi River Valley today, you would see sprawling farmlands dotted with cows and tractors stretching as far as the eye can see. You might also notice the occasional town or city, probably Memphis, Tennessee, or if you're flying at just the right angle, you could catch a glimpse of St. Louis, Missouri. Depending on where exactly you are along the river, you might spot one of the many dams and locks that have been constructed along its length to control flooding and allow for barges to pass through. But there's something else you would notice if you were flying over the Mississippi today, especially if you've never seen any other part of North America. There are trees everywhere. Large swaths of the Mississippi River Valley are covered in dense forests, even around major cities like New Orleans. The American South is known as the South for a reason. But when the Mississippians lived in the Mississippi River Valley between roughly 800 CE and 1600 CE, the landscape looked quite different. For starters, much of the area was underwater. During the spring, the Mississippi flooded regularly, inundating the land surrounding the river and creating vast swamps full of aquatic plants and animals. While we might look down on swamps today as inhospitable and even dangerous places, the Mississippians saw them as teeming with resources. Swamps were full of fish, turtles, frogs, and small mammals like muskrats, all of which provided the Mississippians with food. The trees growing in these swampy areas also had uses. The bark of the oak and hickory trees was used for canoes, while the wood of the cypress tree, which grows well in wet areas, was used for building houses. These annual floods weren't limited to the Mississippi River itself. The Mississippi wasn't the only river in the region. In fact, it was surrounded by several tributaries, including the Ohio River to the north, the Arkansas River to the west, and the Yazoo River to the south. These tributaries flooded every year, spreading new silt across the land and creating what is now known as the most fertile stretch of land in the United States. This floodplain stretched from what is now the city of Memphis in the north to the Gulf of Mexico in the south, encompassing parts of 7 modern-day states, and containing within it roughly 31,000 square miles of flat, grassy land, an area larger than the entire country of Belgium. It was here in the river valleys, away from the hilly forested areas to the east and the west, that the Mississippians built their largest cities. This geography of rivers and floodplains also influenced how the Mississippians interacted with their neighbors. Being surrounded by so much water made travel difficult. There were no roads or bridges connecting the various settlements along the Mississippi River, and the thick forests to the east and west made overland travel nearly impossible. As a result, the Mississippians interacted primarily with those who lived along the river, specifically those living on the floodplain. This created a cultural and trade network that stretched over 400 miles, from north to south, and included dozens of city-sized settlements. It was here in this fertile land that the Mississippians grew crops such as corn, beans, and squash. They hunted deer and other animals in the surrounding forests, and they fished in the river and its tributaries, which teemed with protein. This abundance of resources allowed the Mississippians to thrive. Large settlements grew into major cities, and millions of people spread across the Mississippi River Valley and into the nearby lowlands. Life along the Mississippi was not always easy, however. Floods, droughts, and storms could destroy crops and upend entire communities, and diseases brought from Europe devastated populations who had never even seen a Spaniard. But the Mississippians were able to weather these storms and build large, complex societies, in part because of the way the land shaped their daily lives. The geography of the Mississippi River Valley created a sense of community among the Mississippians, since everyone relied on the same rivers for food and transportation. It also made war more likely with neighboring cultures who also relied on these resources. But perhaps most importantly, the geography of the Mississippi River Valley helped shape the way the Mississippians viewed the world around them. Because the Mississippi floodplain was largely devoid of trees, the sky was unobstructed and wide open. When the Mississippians looked up at the night sky, they saw a seemingly infinite number of stars, an idea that would become central to their religion. Similarly, the vastness of the floodplain may have given the Mississippians a sense of the power of nature and their own small place within it. After all, the Mississippi River was not just a single river, but part of a larger system of waterways that stretched across the continent, connecting all the people and cultures together. The Mississippians understood this connection, and it's likely that their view of the world was shaped by the rivers and plains that surrounded them. So what did this sky-focused, nature-reverent culture actually look like? What were their settlements like? How did their cities function? And how did they interact with other cultures in the region? Unfortunately, you'll have to wait until next week to find out, because this has been the first episode of Foundations, a series dedicated to providing a foundational overview of various historical civilizations around the world. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about the Mississippians, please subscribe to stay up to date on new episodes. Special thanks to our supporters for making these videos possible, and I'll see you next time. Chapter 2: The Rise of the Mississippian World. I'm really excited to talk about Chapter 2, because this is where our story really starts. This is where we start to see these little villages that we talked about in the last video begin to grow and expand and change over time. And by the year 1400, they are going to be the dominant cultural group all across the Mississippi River Valley. So today, we're going to take a journey back to around the year 800 and watch what happens. Okay, so let's set the stage here. We have people living along the Mississippi River and its tributaries for at least 2,000 years by this point. And they are living in these small hamlets, probably not even 100 people each. They are growing crops like beans and squash and maize. That's corn, for those of you outside the South. They're building houses out of wood and thatch. And life is generally pretty good for them, but it's also pretty simple. Their main concern is making sure there is enough food to go around. If the deer aren't migrating through in the fall, then you better hope that your crops turn out well or you're gonna go hungry. But something is happening around 800 that changes all of that, and no one knows exactly what that something is. But archaeologists think there are 3 possible reasons. One is that the climate is starting to get drier, which means there's less flooding along the river, which makes it easier to build houses and store food, and just live a more settled lifestyle. Secondly, they may have been getting some new ideas from the people up north in the Great Lakes region, who were working with larger communities and more complex social structures. And lastly, there may have been some migration happening from the northeast woodlands, where ancestral Native Americans had been living for thousands of years, and they brought new ideas with them. And whatever it was, it caused the people along the Mississippi to begin growing their settlements. So now we have small villages scattered throughout the valley, still not very large, maybe 100 to 300 people living in each one, but they're a little bit more permanent now. People are digging deeper holes for their houses, so that they can last longer. They're also starting to build earthen mounds. Now, these mounds weren't built by one person or even one family. These took a lot of manpower to build, and they were used for things like burials. So important people would be buried on top of the mounds, and that meant that everyone in the village would have to come together and help build it. So they started becoming a little bit more organized, and they began to have leaders, people who could command others to do things. And over time, those leaders became chiefs, and the villages became chiefdoms. And this is why the period from 800 to 1400 is called the Mississippian period. It's named after the Mississippi River, because this was the area where these chiefdoms were located. But scholars nowadays are trying to come up with a new term for it, because Mississippian implies that all of these societies were along the Mississippi River. And we know that's not true. Some of them are only loosely connected to the river, so we'll just call it the Mississippian world. Now, the thing about chiefdoms is that they are not quite as complex as a civilization. There isn't a writing system or monumental architecture like temples or pyramids, but they do have chiefs, and those chiefs hold a lot of power. They control the economy, they dispense justice, and they organize large projects like building mounds. So we are definitely moving towards more complex societies, but we're not quite there yet. Another thing that helps us tell the difference between these early villages and these chiefdoms is how big they are. Early villages might have had 100 or 200 people, but the chiefdoms have grown to encompass several hundred people, sometimes as many as 600 or 700, and they also control a lot more land. While a village might have farmed the land directly around it, chiefdoms will have smaller villages that pay tribute to them, so they're starting to become empires. And we can see this really clearly when we look at Cahokia, which is one of the largest sites in the Mississippi Valley. In the early years, Cahokia was just a small village, but by 1100, It was one of the largest cities in North America, with an estimated population of 10 to 15,000 people. It covers more than 5 square miles, and it's home to 40 to 60 chiefs. Now, most of those people are not living in houses. They're living in what archaeologists call platform mounds. And platform mounds are exactly what they sound like. It's a flat piece of land that's been built up on top of a mound. You can imagine how this works. You have dirt from the mound around you, and you use that to gradually fill in the space next to your house until eventually you have a raised platform for your house to sit on. And this is important because it shows us that Cahokia is not just a collection of villages. These platform mounds are too similar to each other. That means they were built intentionally. That means someone was in charge. Someone made the decision that everyone was going to live on platform mounds, and that someone is probably the chief. And that's how we know that Cahokia is changing. They've gone from a small village with a few dozen people living in houses to a city with thousands of people living on platform mounds. They've gone from being a small farming hamlet to a major trade center. And that tells us that the Mississippian world is expanding. Archaeologists believe that the reason that these chiefdoms were able to grow so quickly is because of the introduction of the bow and arrow. We don't know exactly where it came from, but it shows up in the archaeological record around this time, and it changed everything. First of all, the bow and arrow is much quieter than an atlatl, which is a spear thrower that they had been using before, and that allowed them to hunt more effectively, more quietly. Also, once they had bows and arrows, they didn't need dogs to help them hunt anymore. So now they can use their dogs for other things like herding animals. They also needed fewer people to guard their settlements because bows and arrows were so quiet. It was harder to sneak up on someone if they had bows and arrows. So now those people could go work the fields or do other tasks. And finally, the bow and arrow gave them an advantage over other groups who didn't have them. So they could go to war and conquer other villages, and force those people to pay tribute to them. And that gave them even more resources and more land and more people. So you can see how the bow and arrow had a ripple effect that changed their entire way of life. The last thing that I want to talk about today is slow imagery. And slow imagery is a technique that archaeologists use to show us how fast cultures were changing during this time period. And it looks like this. On one side, we have a small farming hamlet. And on the other side, we have a bustling mound center with traders coming in from all around the region. And in the middle, we have a series of images that show us how they got there. It starts with the small farming hamlet, and then it goes to a village with a few earthen mounds. Then it goes to a town with large platform mounds, and then it goes to a city with hundreds of people living on top of platform mounds. And the reason why it's called slow imagery is because it takes a long time for these changes to happen. It's not like one day you're a small farming hamlet, and the next day you're a big city. This process takes generations. It takes a long time for people to adopt new ideas and new technologies. And it takes even longer for those changes to spread throughout the culture. So slow imagery gives us a way to see that process. It lets us see the small incremental changes that add up to really big differences over time. And that's what happened during the Mississippian world. They didn't go from being a small farming hamlet to a big city overnight. It took them centuries. But that's what happened. And we know that because we can see it in the archaeological record. And next time, we're gonna talk about how that process worked. We re-gon na. talk about the societies that were rising to power in the Mississippian world, and we find out what happened to them. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about today's video. Did you learn anything? Do you have any thoughts about the Mississippian world? Just remember, you're here for the information, but you're staying for the algorithm. Alright, I'll see you next time. This is chapter 3 of a video series called Ancestral Echoes. In this episode, we'll discuss how the mound builders constructed these enormous earthen platforms and what they may have symbolized for the people who built them. The Mississippian culture flourished in what is today the eastern United States from about 800 to 2000 AD. Their society was complex and sophisticated, with large settlements that featured monumental architecture made of wood and earth. These earthworks were constructed over many generations and served various purposes such as burial grounds, ceremonial centers, and places of residence for the elite members of society. In Chapter 1 we learned about the grid-plan cities that the Mississippians constructed, including Monk's Mound in Cahokia, the largest of the platform mounds, which stood at an impressive 100 feet tall and encompassed a whopping 14 acres at its peak. But, have you ever wondered how exactly the Mississippians managed to construct these massive mounds without any modern tools or technology? And what could possibly be the significance of these mounds in understanding their culture and beliefs? The construction of these mounds required a significant amount of labor and planning, but also a deep understanding of engineering and construction techniques. While there's no written record of how exactly the mounds were built, archaeologists have been able to piece together a pretty good idea based on the physical evidence they've uncovered. The process likely began with the selection of a suitable location for the mound. This would have been an area that was level and had access to water and other resources. The Mississippians believed that the land itself was sacred and that it contained the spirits of their ancestors. So choosing a special place to build a mound would have been an important part of the process. Once the location was chosen, the workers would have begun to clear the land of vegetation and debris. Then dig a series of shallow ditches around the perimeter of the mound. These ditches would have helped to shape the mound and keep it stable. The next step would have been to start piling up the dirt and other materials that would make up the mound itself. This would have been done using simple tools such as spades and shovels made of wood or stone. The materials would have been brought to the site in baskets or on sleds, and then they would have been carefully placed on the mound in layers. Each layer would have been compacted to make sure that the mound was stable. This would have been done by trampling the mound with feet or by using heavy objects to press down on the layers. As the mound grew, the workers would have had to use ramps and other devices to help them move materials to the top of the mound. This would have been especially difficult at sites like Cahokia, where the mounds were so large that they required multiple building phases to complete. Despite the challenges, the Mississippians were able to create some truly impressive mounds, some of which rose more than 100 feet above the surrounding ground. But why did they go through all this effort? What was the purpose of these mounds? To answer this question, we have to look at the Mississippian belief system and their view of the world. For the Mississippians, the earth was not just a physical object. It was a living, breathing entity that was sacred and should be respected. They believed that the earth was the body of the Great Mother, the creator of all life, and that everything in the universe was connected to her. This belief system led them to build their settlements in harmony with the land. and it also inspired them to construct mounds that would lift the earth up and bring it closer to the sky. In fact, the word mound itself comes from a Native American word that means earth up or earth house, and this meaning is reflected in the way that the mounds were constructed. The Mississippians would often build their mounds in the shape of a pyramid or a cone, and this shape has a lot of symbolic meaning. The pyramid represents the connection between the earth and the sky, and the cone symbolizes the primordial mound that the Mississippians believed was the birthplace of the world. When the Mississippians built their mounds, they weren't just piling up dirt, they were lifting up the body of the Great Mother and bringing it closer to the sky. This act had a profound meaning for them, and it was something that they did not take lightly. The construction of a mound was a sacred ceremony in which the Mississippians would sing and dance while they worked, and when the mound was finished, it was treated as a kind of shrine. The Mississippians would make offerings to the Great Mother on the mound, and they would also hold ceremonies there to honor the ancestors. But the mounds were not just used for religious purposes. They were also used as platforms for other kinds of structures, such as temples, council houses, and elite residences. In fact, some of the largest and most impressive mounds were actually burial mounds, which contained the remains of important members of Mississippian society. These burial mounds were often decorated with wooden posts or other markers, and they were surrounded by plazas and other structures that formed a kind of complex around them. To truly understand the meaning of the mounds, we must see them as part of a larger system of beliefs and practices. The Mississippians were not just piling up dirt and wood. They were creating a sacred space where they could connect with the spiritual world and honor their ancestors. They believed that the earth was the body of the Great Mother, and they built their mounds as a way of lifting up that body and bringing it closer to the sky. The mounds were not just burial places or ceremonial centers. They were also platforms for temples and other important buildings. They were the foundation of the Mississippian world, both literally and figuratively. If you enjoyed learning about mounds as sacred earth, I invite you to check out the rest of the Ancestral Echoes series, where we explore other aspects of the Mississippian culture, such as their art and their economy. I'm also working on an upcoming project that delves into the fascinating world of ancient trade networks and the vibrant societies that thrived along the ancient trade routes of North America. As we conclude this exploration of the mounds, I want to leave you with a quote from Vine Deloria, a renowned Native American author and activist. He said, "The significance of the mounds to the native peoples of this continent can scarcely be overestimated. They represent the first major step toward civilization." I couldn't agree more. The mounds are a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the Mississippian people, and they continue to inspire awe and wonder in those who study them today. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my latest content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. What do you think about mounds as sacred earth? Do you find the idea of lifting up the earth to meet the sky both beautiful and strange? Or maybe you're left feeling confused by the whole thing. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Also, let me know what you thought of this video and what you want to see more of in the future. Thanks for watching. Now it's time for Chapter 4, The Sun, Giver of Life. This is the 4th episode in my series, The People of the Sun, where we explore Mississippian culture and its mysterious origins. The sun was the giver of life. Without the warmth of the sun's rays, there would be no growth, no corn, no beans, no squash, no food. There would be only cold and darkness. But with the sun, there was the promise of each new day, and with it the hope of warmth and plenty. It is no wonder that the mound builders revered the sun as a life-giving deity. I'm the host. Today, we look at how the ancient Mississippians viewed the sun and how its cycles affected their lives and influenced their religion. Mississippian culture thrived in what is today the Midwestern and southeastern United States from about 800 to 1600 CE. At its peak around 1200 CE, Mississippian society was home to complex cities, large earthen mounds, chieftains and kings, monumental architecture, a vibrant trade network, and a sophisticated cosmology that viewed the sun as a supreme deity. In this episode, we'll see how the sun permeated every aspect of Mississippian life. We'll also learn why archaeologists have found many more burials beneath platform mounds than inside the sacred temple mounds. Before we begin, I ask that you please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy learning about ancient history. The first thing that comes to mind when one thinks of the importance of the sun is its role in agriculture. The corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters, were all sun-loving plants, requiring lots of heat and light to grow, and without these plants, the people would surely starve. These plants would not grow without the sun. Just as people could not live without the sun, it was the source of all life. It gave warmth in the winter, light during the day, and it allowed crops to grow so that people would not die of starvation. Because of the sun, there was the promise of each new day, and with it the hope of plenty. It is no wonder that the sun was such an important part of Mississippian religion. The sun was more than just an important force in nature. To the Mississippians, it was a living deity. Its journey across the sky each day was carefully observed, and its influence was felt in every aspect of their lives. In fact, the sun was the most important god in the Mississippian pantheon. As we saw in Chapter 3, the main ceremonial structure of the Mississippian city was always built to face the rising sun, which signified the return of the sun god after his nightly journey through the underworld. And at each cardinal direction, there were platforms or mounds which represented the four directions and the four guardian spirits who protected the city. The sun's journey began each morning as it rose in the east. This was a time of great celebration because the death-dealing forces of the night were driven away by the returning sun god. With him came the promise of a new day and the hope of plenty. Every morning the people would come out of their homes to greet the returning sun. They would dance and sing to welcome him back, and to thank him for giving them another chance at life. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, they would continue to praise him until he reached the zenith and began his long journey back down toward the west. As the sun began his slow descent toward the west, the atmosphere of celebration would turn to one of mourning. For the Mississippians, this was a time of sadness because the sun god was being pulled away by the forces of darkness. The longer the sun was held by the forces of darkness, the stronger they became. And the closer the sun got to the horizon, the weaker the light became. The people would gather together to try and pull the sun back up into the sky. They would stomp their feet and wave their arms and chant to help the sun rise again in the morning. But the sun god had to make his journey into the underworld each night to renew himself. He needed to be pulled down by the forces of darkness in order to be reborn again in the morning. And so the sun sank lower and lower until it disappeared below the horizon and the darkness consumed the world. Only the bravest warriors would venture out after sunset, because at night the world was filled with danger. All sorts of scary things roamed around in the dark, and it was very easy to get lost. Not only were there wild animals to avoid, but there were also evil spirits, who wanted nothing more than to harm humans. That's why the villages were always built near a large, safe, open space. The people didn't want to have their houses too close together in case they had to run away from something. And it was also built away from the forest because the woods were filled with evil spirits who wanted to do harm. Also, the people never wanted to travel at night unless they absolutely had to because it was just too dangerous. Even during the day, it was best to avoid traveling alone because there were evil spirits that could easily overpower a single person. So if someone had to travel, it was best to go with a group of people so that there would be more power to keep the evil spirits away. And it was very important that travelers did not stop along the way. They had to keep moving so that the evil spirits would not have a chance to attack them. It should be noted that the Mississippians weren't the only Native American culture that believed this way. Many other cultures throughout North America believed that the sun was a supreme deity. The Hopi people in the Southwest believed that the sun was a life-giving spirit that brought warmth, light, and growth to the world. The Lakota people of the Great Plains believed that the sun was a great healer, and that it had the power to cure illness and bring balance to the world. The Cherokee people of the Southeast believed that the sun was a benevolent spirit that protected the world from evil, and that it was responsible for the seasons and the weather. And the Inuit people of the Arctic believed that the sun was a powerful goddess, who provided light and warmth during the long, dark winter months. There are several reasons why the sun was such an important deity to these cultures. First, the sun was essential for life. Without the sun's warmth and light, plants could not grow and people would starve. The sun was also seen as a source of power and energy. The sun's rays were believed to have healing properties, and the sun was often associated with the concept of rebirth. Finally, the sun was a constant presence in the sky. It was a reliable and familiar object that people could count on to return each day. This made the sun a natural choice as a supreme deity. Another reason that the sun was so important to these cultures is that it was a symbol of order and civilization. The regularity of the sun's cycles allowed people to predict the seasons and plan their agricultural activities. This made it possible for people to live in settled communities and raise crops instead of constantly moving in search of food. Agriculture allowed for the development of larger, more complex societies. And the sun was at the center of this social and cultural order. In addition, the sun was often associated with the concept of time. The length of the day and the position of the sun in the sky were used to tell the time. This was important because it allowed people to coordinate their activities and keep track of important dates and events. The sun was also seen as a symbol of the passage of time. The changing of the seasons and the regular cycle of day and night reminded people that time was passing and that life was precious. Finally, the sun was often associated with the concept of purity and enlightenment. The sun's light was believed to be able to purify and heal the world, and the sun was often seen as a symbol of wisdom and knowledge. Those who studied the sun and its cycles were often respected members of society. As we can see, the sun was an extremely important figure in Native American cultures. It was a source of life, power, and order. The sun was also a constant presence in the sky, a symbol of time and a bringer of light and wisdom. The evidence for this is clear in Mississippian society. From the placement of their cities, to the design of their mounds, to the rituals that they performed, everything revolved around the sun. For example, the Mississippians built their cities in areas that had plenty of sunlight. They also built platform mounds in shapes that would maximize the amount of sunlight that they received. And they held rituals and ceremonies that honored the sun and its cycles. So now let's talk about those platform mounds. As we said, the main ceremonial structure in a Mississippian city was always built to face the rising sun. This mound acted as a sort of altar to the sun god, and it was here that the priests would perform rituals and ceremonies in his honor. The sun was also associated with the cardinal directions, and so there were often mounds built at each of the 4 directions of the city. These mounds served as a sort of boundary to the city, and they also acted as a way to keep the city aligned with the cardinal directions. The mounds were also used for burials, and it was common for the elite members of society, such as chiefs and priests, to be buried there. This was because the mounds were seen as a place of power, and they were believed to be able to protect the body from the evil spirits that might try to claim it. The Mississippians weren't the only ones who believed this. The mound builders of the Hopewell culture, who lived several hundred years earlier in the same general area, also built burial mounds that faced the rising sun. It seems likely that the later Mississippian cultures adopted this tradition from the Hopewell. When we examine the artifacts that were found buried with the elite members of Mississippian society, we find that many of them are related to the sun. For example, we often find items such as knives and axes that were used in the rituals and ceremonies that honored the sun. We also find items such as ornaments and jewelry that were decorated with symbols of the sun. These artifacts suggest that the Mississippians believed that the sun was a powerful and important deity, and that those who were close to him, such as the priests and the elite members of society, were very important as well. But what about those platform mounds? As we said before, the Mississippians built many more burial mounds than they did temple mounds. Why is this? Well, it's possible that the Mississippians believed that the sun god was so powerful that he didn't need a temple in order to be honored. Instead, he could be honored anywhere and at any time. Another possibility is that the Mississippians believed that the sun god was too pure and holy to be contained within a temple. It was only when he was traveling in his chariot across the sky that he could be seen by humans. Finally, it's possible that the Mississippians believed that the sun god was so important that he shouldn't be confined to a single location. Instead, he should be honored throughout the city. This is why the platform mounds were built at each of the 4 cardinal directions. They allowed the people to honor the sun god no matter where they were in the city. Whatever the reason, the platform mounds serve as a reminder of the importance of the sun in Mississippian culture. As we conclude this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. The Mississippians were a sophisticated and advanced culture. They were able to develop a complex society and a vibrant trade network, despite the challenges of their environment. They were also able to create a cosmology that explained the mysteries of the natural world. Despite the fact that the Mississippians were such an advanced culture, they were ultimately wiped out by the Europeans. This happened because the Europeans had access to new technologies and weapons that the Mississippians did not. The Europeans also had diseases that devastated Native American populations, who had never even seen a Spaniard. The Mississippians were eventually conquered and forced to assimilate into European culture. Their cities were burned and their mounds were destroyed. Very little evidence of their culture remains today. One of the most tragic aspects of the Mississippian story is that their culture was almost completely destroyed. There are very few artifacts from the Mississippian period that have survived, and much of what has survived is in private collections or in museums far from the areas where it was found. This makes it difficult to learn about the Mississippian culture, but it also means that the Mississippians have been largely forgotten. However, there is hope that by learning more about the Mississippians, we can help to revive their culture and ensure that they are never forgotten. I hope you enjoyed learning about the importance of the sun to the Mississippians. If you did, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. So we've covered how they recorded time with sundials and water clocks. We've seen how they built pyramids to capture the sun's energy, and how they used the movement of the sun in the sky to predict the flooding of the Nile River. But today, we're going to look at how the Egyptians built temples dedicated to the sun and what these temples tell us about the nature of their religion. In this video, we'll be looking at Chapter 5 of the Egyptian Pyramids, A New History by Mark Leninger. You can find more information below. The first thing that we need to understand is that the Egyptians didn't have one single sun god. So the first question we need to ask is, why did they build so many temples to him? In fact, when we look at the surviving temples, it seems that every one of them was designed to capture the sun's path through the sky, whether it was at sunrise or noon or sunset. And this tells us that the worship of the sun wasn't just limited to one particular cult or city. In fact, from the earliest dynasties up until the very last pharaohs, there was a tradition to build new temples to the sun wherever a new king came to power. This suggests that building a temple to the sun was an important way for a pharaoh to demonstrate his divine right to rule. One example of this is the famous Temple of Karnak, which is located near the city of Luxor, not too far away from where we are here. Now, the Temple of Karnak is so vast that it actually consists of a whole group of temples that were constructed over a period of 2,000 years. The oldest parts of the complex date back to the Middle Kingdom, but most of what you see today comes from the reign of the New Kingdom pharaohs, including Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun's father Akhenaten. However, even though the temple was built over such a long period of time, the orientation of each successive building was carefully aligned to follow the same path of the sun. For example, the Red Chapel of Amenhotep III, which dates back to around 1350 BC, has its entrance facing east to catch the rising sun. Then there's the Black Granite Temple built by Tutankhamun's father, Akhenaten, which was built later, but it's also oriented to face east. And it's only after Akhenaten's death that another pharaoh came along who decided to change the direction of the Sun Temple. This was the great pharaoh Ramesses II, who ruled during the 13th century BC. He built several huge temples across Egypt, but the main temple to the sun at Karnak was turned to face south. This means that at noon, when the sun is highest in the sky, it would shine directly through the entrance. However, the entrance to a temple isn't the only place that we can see the influence of the sun. The floors of some of the temples also had special designs laid out in front of them, like this one in Abydos. If we look at the design itself, we can see that it resembles the shape of a beetle with its head pointing towards the rising sun, and the body of the beetle was thought to represent rebirth, since the scarab beetle would roll balls of dung across the desert floor and then lay an egg inside them. So it was believed that the beetle was burying the sun's rays each evening and then giving birth to the sun each morning. But there's another reason why the design is so significant. That's because the distance between the entrance to the temple and the end of the beetle design was exactly the same as the length of the shadow cast by the temple at noon. In other words, the design of the floor acted as a giant shadow clock, showing the worshippers the exact length of the sun's shadow during the day. It was only after Ramses II that this design was abandoned and replaced with something else. And this brings us to our second topic, which is the fires that were kept burning inside the temples. You see, according to Egyptian beliefs, the sun didn't just travel across the sky during the day. It also sailed across a heavenly ocean each evening and was reborn each morning. And so, just as the sun made its journey each day, the Egyptians also tried to make a similar journey in the afterlife. That's why we see the sun god depicted in the sky above the Book of the Dead, which contains the spells that the Egyptians would use to guide themselves through the underworld. And it's this book that gives us the key to understanding what the fires inside the temples represented. According to the Book of the Dead, the pharaoh was required to keep an eternal flame burning inside the temple in order to mirror the sun's eternal flame. The fuel for this fire would have come from the ritual use of incense, and it would have been tended by the priests of the temple. And if we look at the layout of some of the temples, we can see that they even went to great lengths to ensure that the smoke from the incense would undamage the interior. For example, we know that in the Temple of Karnak, there were vents placed directly underneath the roof that would suck the smoke downwards. Then the smoke would pass through a series of pipes hidden inside the walls before finally escaping outside, leaving the temple interior free from any lingering smoke. But there's another reason why the Egyptians kept these perpetual flames burning. That's because fire was seen as a way to purify objects, and in the case of the temples, the fire was used to purify the objects that were used during the ceremonies. Let's take a closer look at these ritual objects, which form the third topic of today's chapter. The first type of object that we should mention are the effigy vessels, which are shaped like various creatures, including baboons, ibises, and humans. Now, if we examine these effigy vessels, we can see that they have little holes drilled into the sides of their bodies, allowing smoke to pass through and purify their insides. But it wasn't just the shape of the vessel that was important. In some cases, the design painted onto the surface was also very significant. Take, for example, this vessel in the shape of an ibis. Not only does it have holes drilled into the sides, but there's also a hole drilled into the top of its head. And this would have allowed the smoke to pass through the body of the ibis and out through its beak. What makes this vessel particularly interesting is that we can see traces of blue paint on its beak and on its tail. And this blue color is important because it represents the sky. And so we can imagine that the smoke from the purifying fire was passing through the body of the bird, cleansing it, and then releasing it into the sky above. Another ritual object mentioned in the chapter are the bundle sticks, which were typically made from two pieces of wood joined together with a crosspiece. These bundles were used to hold other objects, such as incense burners and ladles. But they were also used as part of a ceremony called the opening of the mouth. During this ceremony, the Egyptians believed that it was necessary to breathe life into statues and other inanimate objects. And so the bundle stick played an important role in this ceremony, since it was used to pour liquids and symbolic food offerings into the mouths of the statues. But perhaps the most striking of all the ritual objects were the painted designs. These designs weren't just confined to temples, but could be found in tombs, houses, and even on papyrus scrolls. Some of the designs were abstract, while others resembled human faces, animals, or deities. And their presence within the temple suggests that they may have acted as talismans to protect those who entered. But the painted designs also had another purpose. That's because, just like the bundle sticks, they were also used during the opening of the mouth ceremony, since they were used to pour symbolic food and drink into the mouths of the statues. What I find fascinating about these ritual objects is the wide variety of ways that they interacted with the space within the temple. Some of them, like the effigy vessels, were placed inside the temple to absorb the smoke from the purification fires. Others, like the bundle sticks, were used to bring offerings into the mouths of the statues. And still others, like the painted designs, may have been used for the same purpose, but they were simply incorporated into the walls themselves. If you want to learn more about the rituals that took place inside the temples, as well as other topics related to ancient Egypt, be sure to check out the recommended books and documentaries in the description below. Also remember to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to stay up to date with all my future videos. Thanks for watching. The year is 1200 AD. You're standing in the largest city in North America, a sprawling metropolis with 40,000 people and the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. This is Chapter 6, Cahokia, the Great Sun City. This is the largest city ever built by the Mississippian culture. Today, it's right outside of St. Louis, Missouri, buried under a modern metropolis. But back then this was Monk's Mound, a massive artificial hill that rose high above the surrounding landscape, dominating the skyline, and serving as both a platform for elite society and a burial place for their most important citizens. It would have been visible for miles and miles, kind of like a big friendly giant waving to the sun. But there was also something else about this mound that was very special. It was perfectly aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. And if you wanted to build an enormous calendar to worship the cycles of the sun, well, this might be the perfect place to do it. Welcome to the Woodhenge calendar circle. There are two main reasons why we think this is a calendar. First off, it's perfectly aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. And not only that, but these posts would have cast the exact same shadows at those times. The second reason is that the entire wood and structure was likely painted red. And we know that because archaeologists found a red pigment called hematite that was ground into a powder and mixed with a binder. Then they spread it over everything, making the whole thing bright red, just like the supergiant example from Chaco Canyon. In fact, we think that the builders of this wood and gen copied the layout of Chaco Canyon almost exactly. They took the basic design and adjusted it slightly to fit the geography of their location. And when you look closely at the posts, you can see that some of them were carved with petroglyphs, just like what you would have seen in New Mexico. It's believed that these symbols represent celestial bodies or astronomical events, things like eclipses and comets, because remember, the entire point of Stonehenge was to keep track of the sky. The problem is that we don't actually know for sure what these symbols mean. So astronomers and archaeologists have had a field day coming up with their own ideas about what this place was used for. Some say that it was a sophisticated astronomical observatory, where the elite class came to watch the skies and predict eclipses years in advance. Others say it was a ceremonial site to honor the gods during major astronomical events like a solar eclipse or a comet. Still others think that it was a burial ground where the remains of important priests were laid to rest after they died. We also know that there was a palisade built around the entire woodhenge, which was probably used to block off the area and keep the general public from entering unless they were invited, and it's possible that the burials were inside this fence. If so, then the priests who were buried here were very important, maybe even royalty. But it wasn't just the astronomical alignments that made this place special. It was also a political and religious capital. In other words, it was a bit of a big deal. This city was one of hundreds of Mississippian settlements, but it was the biggest one, and that's why it's sometimes called the metropolis. Most archaeologists agree that it was the cultural and political center of the entire Mississippian world, just like Cahokia was to the mound builders. For centuries, the Mississippians were spreading across the Midwest, building large towns and villages, kind of like the suburbs of a big metropolis. And every once in a while, they would come together in Cahokia for a big festival or to pay tribute to the king. At its peak, around the year 1200 AD, Cahokia had between 20 and 40,000 people living within its borders. That made it the largest city north of Mexico and the third largest in all of North America, right after Tenochtitlan and Quilquilco. And of course, these cities were right on the water, while Cahokia was deep in the middle of a forest. To be fair, it was still pretty close to the Mississippi River, which provided food and resources, and the river could also be used for transportation. But it was until till the Spanish arrived with their horses and firearms that the population started to explode. When the natives got a taste of how easy it was to wipe out a whole village with guns and horses, they started building bigger cities to protect themselves. That's why mound builders started building huge fortifications around their towns. But not everyone bought into the whole warpath lifestyle, and there's evidence that the Mississippians were trying to stay neutral and trade with both sides. This could have worked for a while, but eventually the Aztec Empire would fall and the Spanish would start searching for new places to conquer. And sadly, this would lead to the downfall of Cahokia. In 1572, Hernando de Soto arrived in the eastern woodlands looking for gold and glory. He and his conquistadors went on a rampage, killing anyone who didn't give them what they wanted. They fought against the mound builders, stole their valuables, and destroyed their way of life. But Cahokia never fully recovered from this devastation. By the early 1600s, the population had declined significantly, and the city was basically abandoned by 1650. To this day, we don't know exactly what happened to the people who lived in Cahokia. Some historians believe that the conquistadors wiped them all out, but others think that they simply assimilated with other Native American tribes. It's also possible that the population decline was due to an epidemic brought over by the Spanish. Either way, the great city was completely abandoned by the time French explorers arrived in the area. But enough about the downfall of Cahokia. Let us take a stroll through the city and see what life was like for the people who lived here around the year 1200 AD. We already mentioned that the city was huge, kind of like St. Louis today. There were dozens of neighborhoods filled with houses and temples and palaces. Each neighborhood was built on a different mound, which helped to organize the city and provide space for everyone. If you lived in Cahokia, you wouldn't necessarily have your own house. Instead, you would live with several other families in a large communal structure that was probably made out of wood. These buildings weren't permanent, so they needed to be rebuilt every few years. Each family would have their own individual rooms, but the rest of the communal areas would be shared by everyone. These spaces included a central plaza, a large kitchen, storage rooms, and a sweat house. They might even have had a basketball court, except instead of a ball, they would have used a small rubber ball. This game was very popular among the Mississippians, but it was more than just a fun activity. The game was filled with symbolism, and each move mimicked the actions of animals. The players would crawl like snakes, hop like rabbits, and fly like eagles. So playing the game was like a ceremony that honored the animals and their connection to the natural world. For the most part, life in Cahokia would have been pretty peaceful. Sure, there were plenty of conflicts with neighboring tribes, but the city's main focus was trade and diplomacy. They specialized in growing corn and squash, and they traded these crops with other Mississippian settlements. These expeditions would be dangerous though, because the forests were filled with wild animals and rival warriors. But if you were brave enough to travel to other cities, you could participate in festivals and ceremonies that honored the gods. During these trips, you would probably visit another huge city called Pocomopot. This is considered to be the second largest Mississippian settlement, and it was probably built around the year 900 AD. Like Cahokia, it had a large workforce of laborers who kept the city running and farmers who grew food for the entire population. It's estimated that 6,000 people lived in the city proper, but that's not counting the outlying neighborhoods. Just like Cahokia, this place was organized and efficient. It had straight streets and building setbacks and an enormous plaza surrounded by important structures. It also had a grid layout, meaning that the city could easily be divided into blocks. This made it easier to count the number of houses and the number of people living there. And it also made it easier to collect taxes and enforce laws. So if you were a ruler in one of these cities, you would have had a pretty good idea of how much food you would need to store for the winter, or how many warriors you would need to defend the city. Unfortunately, we don't know too much about the government of Mississippian cities. They didn't leave behind any written records, so everything we know comes from archaeological evidence. What we do know is that they had chiefs, and some of these chiefs held a lot of power. After all, they were able to organize thousands of people to build giant pyramids and temples. We also know that these cities were probably democratic in some ways because most of the population was free. Unlike the Aztecs, there were no slaves, and everyone was allowed to participate in religious ceremonies. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy with this system. Some members of the ruling class started to abuse their power and demand that everyone pay them tribute. Others felt that the chiefs were becoming too powerful and wanted to restore the old ways. This tension would eventually boil over, and the elites would be wiped out, leaving the commoners to rebuild their society. But this time, they would build it better. That's why the Mississippian period is considered to be the pinnacle of Native American culture. They built enormous pyramids that reached 100 feet tall. They organized their cities with advanced engineering techniques, and they developed a sophisticated system of agriculture that allowed them to grow enough food for giant cities. Click here to watch Chapter 7. The Decline and Legacy of the Mississippians, or click here to watch this video, and don't forget to subscribe. Ceremonies of Light and Shadow. The sun beats down on our world, bringing warmth and life. But what happens when it disappears? What secrets does the darkness hold? Join me for Chapter 7 of our journey through ancient civilizations. let's dig into the fascinating topic of ceremonies performed in the shadow of the sun god. As always, new episodes are released every week on Wednesdays. You can catch them here or on another platform. But if you want to get early access or watch ad-free, consider supporting us directly. We really appreciate it. And now let's dive into the mysteries of Chapter 7. The earth is bathed in sunlight, but all too aware of the sun's waning power as winter approaches. The days grow shorter and a chill wind whispers through the trees. A hush falls over the land as the sun god takes his final bow behind the horizon. People gather in fields and on hilltops, their faces turned towards the darkening sky. It's a time of endings, yes, but also a time of beginnings. For deep in the earth, life is preparing to stir once more. Seasonal rituals mark the passage of time from the planting of seeds in the spring to the bountiful harvest in the fall. And then comes the darkest time of the year, when the cycle seems to end and a new year begins. In this chapter, we will explore how ancient societies celebrated these cycles and honored the sun god through ceremonies that blended reverence and revelry. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built grand temples like El Castillo at Chichen Itza, aligned with the cardinal points to capture the sun's rays during solstices and equinoxes. When the sun god passed through the zenith on the summer solstice, it was a cause for celebration. The Maya believed that their king was the embodiment of the sun god, and so he was carried in procession to the temple where priests performed a sacred ballet. They mimed the journey of the sun across the sky, complete with a mock battle against the forces of darkness. Only when the ritual was complete would the king descend from the temple, reunited with his people until the following year's solstice. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, the Aztecs performed a fertility rite in the shadow of the Templo Mayor. A young man, dressed as the rain god, Tlaloc, led a procession of priests and worshippers to the temple. There they left offerings of flowers and human hearts before the sun god Huitzilopochtli. This ritual was not merely a symbolic act, it was a desperate plea for the sun god's favor. The Aztecs believed that the world was held in a delicate balance, and it was the blood sacrifices that kept it in equilibrium. When the Spanish arrived, they witnessed the horrifying reality of this belief. On the Templo Mayor's peak, a young Aztec was suspended by hooks piercing his chest. His heart, the source of his life and the essence of his being, was about to be offered to the gods. His lips curled in a silent scream, a final breath escaping his lungs. The crowd watched in solemn silence as the priest approached, his obsidian blade gleaming in the firelight. With one swift movement, the heart was cut out and held aloft for all to see. A cheer erupted from the crowd, thanking the gods for their sacrifice. Our next stop takes us to the heart of Africa, where the Dogon people have long revered the sun as a life-giving force. Each morning, priests climb the steps of the great enclosure, a massive structure of tamped earth and stone that echoes with centuries of ceremonies. Their ascent is a symbolic journey to the realm of the sun god Oma, where they perform rituals to ensure his safe passage across the sky. The priests are not just spiritual leaders, they are mediators between the earthly realm and the celestial one, ensuring the balance between light and darkness. But it's at the equinox that their ceremonies reach a crescendo. When day and night are of equal length, the Dogon believe that the sun god is at his most vulnerable, and so the rituals become more intense, the prayers more fervent. At the equinox, the Dogon also honor the forces of darkness, led by the fearsome Namo, who dwell in the underworld. It's a reminder that life and death are intertwined, that darkness is as necessary as light. Our journey then takes us to the lush jungles of Southeast Asia, where the Khmer people built the magnificent temple complex of Angkor. Here, amidst the moss-covered towers and tangled roots, a different kind of ceremony unfolds. As the sun rises, priests carrying ornate vessels filled with holy water make their way through the temple. They move with a rhythmic grace, their movements echoing the ebb and flow of the sun's journey across the sky. At the center of the complex stands the Bayon, a five-tiered pyramid that symbolizes Mount Meru, the mythical center of the universe. It is here that the priests pour the holy water, a ritual that ensures the health and prosperity of the kingdom. For the Khmer, the sun god was not just a celestial being, he was a king, and his court was located in the heavens. The Bayon was his palace, and the priests were his servants. Another important ceremony was the churning of the Sea of Milk. To the Khmer, the churning of the Sea of Milk by the gods was an event of cosmic importance. It was said that from the sea foam emerged the elixir of immortality, which granted the gods eternal life. To commemorate this event, the Khmer staged a reenactment, complete with a giant churning apparatus and actors dressed as divine beings. The sun god's power is undeniable, but what happens when he is challenged? Our next tale takes us to the rugged landscapes of northern Europe, where the Germanic tribes held their annual Thing celebrations. The Thing was not just a social gathering, it was a time for settling disputes and making laws. But it was also a festival of the sun god Thunder. As the winter solstice approached, the tribes would gather in a clearing, their tents forming a circle around a massive Yule log. The air crackled with anticipation as the chief of the tribe, acting as Thunder's representative, entered the circle. Adorned in furs and wielding a hammer, he demanded tribute from those gathered there, demanding that they renounce evil and pledge to uphold the law. The response echoed through the clearing, a resounding oath that bound them together in their devotion to the sun god. Yet even in this celebration of light, there was room for the shadows. For the Germanic tribes believed that the sun god was not invincible. He had enemies, beings of chaos and darkness that sought to extinguish his light. And so while the Yule log burned brightly, the chief kept watch, warding off the forces of darkness with his hammer raised high. As the night wore on, the Yule log began to sputter and die, casting long, menacing shadows across the clearing. The chief fought valiantly, but the darkness grew stronger, threatening to engulf him. Just when it seemed that the sun god's power was waning, a young warrior stepped forward. Filled with the spirit of Thunder, he took the chief's hammer and renewed the sacred oath, pledging to protect the light no matter the cost. With renewed vigor, the chief continued his vigil, the shadows retreating before him. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, the celebration reached its climax. The darkness was banished, and the sun god's light shone forth, bathing the clearing in warmth and gold. The Germanic tribes had once again triumphed over the forces of darkness, and their devotion to Thunder had been rewarded. The Thing was more than just a festival, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a celebration of light in the face of overwhelming darkness. From the heart of Mesoamerica to the forests of northern Europe, we have seen how ancient civilizations honored the sun god through ceremonies that blended awe, reverence, and sometimes even terror. As the sun's power waned and darkness threatened to consume the world, these cultures created rituals that celebrated the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The Maya danced in the shadow of the feathered serpent. The Aztecs sacrificed at the top of the Templo Mayor, the Dogon climbed the great enclosure, the Khmer churned the sea of milk, and the Germanic tribes gathered around the Yule log. These ceremonies were not just acts of worship, they were a testament to the human spirit's enduring power in the face of the natural world's awesome majesty. But our journey is not yet over. We still have much to learn about the sun god's influence on human civilization. In the next chapter, we will explore the sun's impact on ancient economies and trade routes. How did the sun shape the way people traded and interacted across vast distances? Join me next time as we delve into the fascinating ways that our ancient ancestors harnessed the power of the sun to connect with each other. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, may the light of the sun god guide you, and the wisdom of the ancients illuminate your path. This is Chapter 8. The People and Their Beliefs. We've been following the journey of our protagonist, the son of the sun god. From his birth in the constellation of the Scorpion to his life among the humans in Mesoamerica. His father, the sun god, was told that the humans had forgotten him, so he sent his son down to remind them of their forgotten traditions. And along the way, we have learned about their culture and society. But now it's time to delve deeper into their beliefs and religion. Let's go back to the village square where men are practicing the Mesoamerican ball game. In this sport, two teams try to maneuver a heavy rubber ball through a stone hoop suspended from two posts. These games were more than just a game. They were an integral part of their religious practices. The players wore protective gear made of leather and wood and often played barefoot. This was not only to protect themselves from injury, but also because their feet were considered sacred. They believed that the soles of their feet represented the heavens and the earth, and these markings symbolized the stars and the land. Before starting the game, they performed a ritual to honor the gods. They would make offerings of flowers, incense, and sometimes even human hearts. The game itself was seen as a metaphor for the battle between good and evil, with the two teams representing opposing forces. The winner of the game was believed to have brought victory for their team's patron deity. This was no mere children's game. It was a spectacle that attracted huge crowds. Sometimes entire villages would put their faith in their local team, and the pressure to win could be intense. The priests were also heavily invested in the game, as they saw it as a way to influence the gods. Remember, the priests were the intermediaries between the gods and the people. If the priests were not careful, however, they risked angering the gods, and so they had to walk a fine line between manipulation and deceit. Our hero has been watching these games since he was young. It was a tradition in his family to attend the ball game every full moon. His father, a respected elder, would explain the religious significance of the game and the importance of respecting the gods. He taught his son that everything in the universe was connected, and that the gods needed to be honored. He knows that the humans have strayed from the teachings of the gods, and that it is up to him to remind them of their forgotten ways. Our hero wants to participate in the game himself, but he is not yet ready. He decides to approach one of the best players in the village and ask for guidance. The experienced player agrees to teach him, but warns him that the road to mastery is long and difficult. Our hero accepts the challenge and begins his training. He learns how to control the ball with his hips and shoulders, how to maneuver around his opponents, and how to score points. But it is not just about physical skill. He also learns about the spiritual aspect of the game. As he trains, he thinks about his father's legacy and the importance of his mission. With each passing day, he becomes more determined to succeed. Finally, the day arrives when he is ready to play. He joins a team and steps onto the court. The crowd cheers, and the atmosphere is electric. He takes a deep breath, remembering his father's teachings, and the game begins. As the ball is thrown into the air, he leaps to catch it. His heart pounds with excitement and reverence. He has finally come full circle. The world of the ancient Mesoamericans was a deeply religious one. The sky was ruled by the gods, who were believed to live in a paradise called Tamonchen. To reach Tamonchen, the sun god had to travel across the sky every morning and evening. During his journey, he would pass through the realm of the underworld, which was ruled by the goddess Mictlantecuhtli. She was the personification of death and darkness, and she was feared by all. The sun god had to be careful when passing through her realm, as she was known to devour those who angered her. The third layer of the cosmos was the earth, which was inhabited by humans and other living creatures. The earth was seen as a bridge between the underworld and the sky, and it was the sun god's job to keep it in balance. He did this by providing light and warmth to the humans, as well as by protecting them from the dangers of the underworld. There were demons and monsters that tried to prevent him from reaching Tamonchen, but he was always victorious, thanks to his power and his courage. When the sun god returned to Tamonchen after his journey across the sky, he was greeted by his fellow gods. They would share stories of the humans, and the sun god would tell them about the challenges he had faced on his journey. Together, they would plan how to best guide and protect the humans in the coming year. This was not an easy task, as the humans were constantly in danger. They were vulnerable to the attacks of demons and monsters, as well as to the wrath of the gods. But the sun god and his fellow deities were committed to their duty. They knew that the fate of the world depended on it. The ancient Mesoamericans believed that the world was created in a series of stages. In the first stage, there was only darkness and chaos. Then the gods emerged from the underworld and began to create the world. They formed the earth, the sky, and the seas, and they populated the earth with animals and plants. They also created the first humans from maize. The Mesoamericans believed that they were created from the 5 primary elements: water, wind, earth, fire, and ether. These elements were not just natural phenomena, they were also seen as spiritual forces that governed the universe. Water represented fertility and life. Wind represented change and communication. Earth represented stability and growth. Fire represented transformation and purification, and ether represented wisdom and enlightenment. Each of these elements was associated with a particular god or goddess, and they all played an important role in the creation of the world. The gods also created the first humans with special abilities. These humans were the ancestors of the Mesoamerican people, and they were tasked with maintaining balance in the universe. They were given the responsibility of caring for the earth and its inhabitants, as well as honoring the gods. Unfortunately, the first humans did not fulfill their responsibilities. They forgot about the gods and became greedy and selfish. The gods were disappointed, but they also felt pity for the humans. They knew that the humans were not perfect, but they still had potential for greatness. So the gods decided to intervene and guide the humans back to the right path. They sent prophets and teachers to warn the humans and help them understand their mistakes. But the humans were stubborn and often did not listen. The gods then decided to use more drastic measures. They sent floods, earthquakes, and other natural disasters to punish the humans and remind them of their power. Through these trials, the humans learned humility and respect for the gods. They realized that they were not in control of the universe, and that they needed help from the divine beings. From that point on, the humans promised to honor the gods and do their best to maintain balance in the world. They built temples and made offerings to show their gratitude and devotion. They also created myths and legends to keep the memory of the gods alive. The Mesoamericans believed that their world was constantly changing and evolving, but that the fundamental balance between the elements and the cosmos was being maintained. They knew that they were not just passive observers of the universe, but active participants who had the power to shape their own destiny. The Mesoamericans had no written language, but they had a rich tradition of oral storytelling. The elders of the community were responsible for preserving and transmitting the history and mythology of their people. They would gather the young people around them and share tales of the gods, heroes, and monsters that populated their world. These stories were not just for entertainment, they were a way to teach important lessons and values. The myths and legends served as a reminder of the importance of balance, harmony, and respect for nature. Our hero is now a young man, and he has mastered the art of the ballgame. He is respected by his peers and admired by the women, but he has not forgotten his father's mission. He still carries the burden of reminding the humans of their forgotten traditions. One day, while playing a particularly intense game, he has a vision. He sees his father standing in the sky, watching over him. The sun god tells him that it is time to take on his true responsibility. He tells our hero that he must become the new sun god and continue his legacy. Our hero is shocked and afraid, but he knows that he cannot refuse his destiny. He accepts his father's mantle and becomes the new sun god. He ascends to the sky and takes his place among the gods. From there he watches over the humans and guides them on their spiritual journey, and so our story comes to an end. We hope you enjoyed learning about the Mesoamerican culture and beliefs. Remember to hit the like button if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching. I'm the author of an upcoming book called Earth, Fire, Air, and Water, a practical guide to integrating feng shui and architecture. In this video, we'll look at Chapter 9, Solar Alignments in Architecture. This chapter explores how the orientation of mounds, buildings, and rooms impacts our relationship with the sun, and how the geometry of built spaces interacts with the Earth's orbital path around the sun. The most basic considerations for a building's location is how much sun or shade it gets throughout the day. This is the difference between an east and a west exposure. An east exposure gets morning sun, and a west exposure gets afternoon sun. For new construction, we can plan these carefully, but if you're working with an existing building, you have to take what you get. When it comes to choosing a building site, there are many factors to consider: the slope of the land, the quality of the soils, proximity to water, views, just to name a few. And so it's quite rare that a building sits perfectly aligned with the sun. Even when this happens by chance, the openings in the building envelope may not be aligned with true south, so that solar advantage is lost. When the sun passes directly over the equator, the day and night are roughly equal in length. These are the equinoxes, which occur approximately March and September each year. During the equinox, the sun will rise in the east and set in the west. At this time of year, all directions are equal. At any hour of the day, the altitude of the sun will be the same regardless of direction. The solstices occur when the sun reaches its most northerly and southerly position relative to the equator. The summer solstice occurs around June, when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky at noon, and is directly overhead at the Tropic of Cancer, which is 23.5 degrees north latitude. This is the longest day of the year. The winter solstice occurs around December, when the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky at noon and is directly overhead at the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23.5 degrees south latitude. This is the shortest day of the year. On the solstices, the sun rises in the northeast or southeast and sets in the northwest or southwest. The difference between east and southeast, or between west and southwest, is about 23.5 degrees. On the solstices, the sun is at its most extreme positions. But the angles of the sun above or below the horizon change quickly as the hours pass. It's the steepness of the sun's trajectory through space that dictates the amount of heat and light that reach us here on the ground. The closer the sun is to the horizon, the more diffuse the radiation is spread out over a larger area. The further the sun is from the horizon, the more direct the radiation is, and the more intense the heat and light become. On the summer solstice, the sun reaches its highest point in the sky at noon. Here at 40 degrees north latitude, the sun reaches an altitude of almost 78 degrees. On the winter solstice, the sun is at its lowest point in the sky at noon. Here at 40 degrees north latitude, the sun reaches an altitude of only 12 degrees. The temperature difference between these two conditions can be dramatic. On the winter solstice, the sun passes directly overhead at the Tropic of Capricorn, and at this point, the altitude of the sun at noon is 90 degrees. In the northern hemisphere, the period between the spring and fall equinoxes, which is roughly 6 months, sees temperatures increase. This is because during this time, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. The period between the fall and the spring equinoxes, which is also roughly 6 months, sees temperatures decrease as the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. For every 1 degree of latitude north or south of the equator, the sun is 69 miles, or 111 kilometers further away from directly overhead at noon on the winter solstice than on the summer solstice. Therefore, the temperature difference between these two conditions is less the closer one is to the equator. This is why the climate of Singapore, which is near the equator, is consistently warm throughout the year, whereas the climate of New York, which is further north, experiences for distinct seasons. The solstices and equinoxes are very important times of the year. They mark significant moments in the cycles of nature. For example, the winter solstice is often celebrated as the rebirth of the sun, when the sun begins its journey back towards strength and warmth. The summer solstice is often celebrated as the death of the sun, when the sun begins its journey into the darkness of winter. The spring and fall equinoxes are often celebrated as moments of balance, when day and night are equal. The solstices and equinoxes can be used as a tool for determining where to build and orient a structure. Structures aligned along the solstices and equinoxes will experience a shift in their internal spatial qualities throughout the year. By tracking the sun's path across the sky, we can predict how intensely a room will receive sunlight, and how large its shadows will be at different times of the year. Tracking the sun's path across the sky at different latitudes also reveals the differences in how the sun will appear in the sky based on the time of the year and the location. Passive solar design involves orienting and sizing windows to take advantage of solar energy. Windows facing south receive the most solar radiation in the northern hemisphere. Those facing east or west receive less solar radiation but are still advantageous during certain parts of the day. As discussed earlier, the exact amount of solar radiation varies depending on the latitude. South-facing roofs are ideal for photovoltaic cells, since they receive the most direct sunlight. A building aligned with true south will cast no shadow on the winter solstice. When the sun is at its lowest point in the sky, a building aligned with true north will cast its largest shadow on the winter solstice when the sun is at its lowest point in the sky. A building aligned with true south will receive the most sun during the winter and the least during the summer. A building aligned with true north will receive the least sun during the winter and the most during the summer. If your house faces south, then in the summer you will wake up to sunlight streaming into your bedroom window, and in the winter you will enjoy the afternoon sun warming the family room. If your house faces north, then in the winter you will wake up to sunlight streaming into your bedroom window, and in the summer you will enjoy the afternoon sun warming the family room. Designing a building or room aligned with the solstices and equinoxes can be an effective way of regulating the internal temperature through the use of shading devices such as eaves and verandas. Buildings and rooms oriented along the solstices and equinoxes can be designed to take advantage of prevailing winds to naturally ventilate the space. Spaces oriented along the solstices and equinoxes can also be designed to frame views of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The sun's apparent path across the sky can be tracked using specialized software like NASA's AnyPath, which calculates the path of the sun based on the observer's latitude and longitude. You can download a copy of Chapter 9, Solar Alignments in Architecture, as well as the rest of Chapter 1 through 8 from my website, theoasiscollective.com. This book is a work in progress, so feedback is greatly appreciated. Please share any thoughts you have about this chapter in the comments section below. Many ancient cultures recognized the significance of the solstices and equinoxes, and built monuments to align with these special moments of the year. Stonehenge in England is probably the most famous example, but there are others around the world. Some of the best known include Karnak in France, the Nabta Playa in Egypt, Machu Picchu in Peru, the Colosseum in Italy, the pyramids of Chichen Itza in Mexico, the Temple of Kukulkan in Uzmel, also in Mexico, the Great Zimbabwe in Africa, the Kayenta and Valletta Butte in Arizona, the Keystone in Utah, the Newark Earthworks in Ohio, and the Cosmos Mystery Spot in California. There are also many examples of Native American mounds that were built to align with the solstices and equinoxes. The most famous example is Cahokia Mounds, located near East St. Louis, Illinois. The Monk's Mound, the largest of the mounds, aligns with the solstices. Another interesting example is Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, which contains several great houses built by the ancestral Pueblo people. The walls of some of the kivas, which are underground ceremonial chambers, align with the solstices and equinoxes. Another example is Puma Punku in Bolivia. This is a site of mysterious stone ruins that predate the Inca. There are many examples of rooms whose axes align with the solstices and equinoxes. The Pantheon in Rome is probably the most famous. The summer solstice occurs when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky at noon. Here in Rome, the sun reaches an altitude of 85 degrees. This means that on this day, the sun can pass through the oculus in the Pantheon's concrete dome and touch the floor at the altar. Machu Picchu is another famous example. The main temple at Machu Picchu has 3 doorways. The central doorway aligns with the sun's path across the sky on the winter solstice. This is the day the Inca king Pochacati was inaugurated and began his reign. The earthworks at Newark are an amazing example of pre-Columbian mound building culture in North America. The primary enclosure contains 3 gateways. The solstices pass through 2 of these gateways, while the gateway at the opposite end frames the rising moon on the summer solstice. These are just a few examples of how earthworks and buildings have been aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. If you know of any others, please share them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Chapter 10. The Chief as the Sun's Representative. Now this is an interesting chapter because here we start to see the political ideas of the book really coalesce and come together with some of the spiritual ideas that we have been discussing. So in Chapter 10, we are told that all the chiefs are representatives of the great sun, and so they mediate between the people and the cosmos. They embody the power of the sun. That's what makes them powerful. It is because they are seen as being linked to the sun, the great spirit, the great power. They embody that power. They don't necessarily have it in themselves, but because they are seen as being connected to the source of all life, they become important figures, especially when it comes to warfare. In fact, if we look at the previous chapter, we were talking about how war is basically inevitable among nations. And the reason for that is because there is no central authority to maintain peace. There is no overarching government. Each nation is pretty much on its own, and so you get this situation where everyone is fighting everyone. In a sense, each nation is trying to impose their version of law on others. And because there's no overarching legal system, it just devolves into constant warfare. And so what do you have? You have these chiefs, who are representatives of the sun. They embody the power of the sun. And so through them, we can try to achieve some kind of balance. It is also interesting that many of the characters in this story are named after celestial bodies, whether they are stars or constellations. It sort of reinforces the idea that everything is interconnected. Everything is related. There is nothing that exists independently. And so the idea of the chief as the representative of the sun is something that becomes very important. Now I want to read you a passage from the text that talks about the regalia of the chief. The type of clothing that they wear, the ornaments, the different things that they have, because they all reinforce the idea that the chief is connected to the sun. This is on page 137. Here we go. He also received ornaments of other kinds. The abers of his headdress were made of feathers of the great birds that lived in the upper air. His girdle was adorned with the teeth and claws of the mountain lion. Around his neck he wore ornaments of the heart of a deer, the sinews of a salmon, the claws of a lynx, the teeth of a wolf, and the tail of a black bear. Copper plates were fixed to his leggings, which shone like the sunbeams. No one might look upon them without thinking of the sun. These ornaments had been given to the chief by the master of the tribe. They were hereditary ornaments, belonging to the chiefs of the tribe since time immemorial. So here we have a number of different elements that are important to note. First of all, we have the idea of the sun. We have copper plates that are fixed to his leggings that shine like the sun's beams. The most important element here, however, is the feathers in his headdress. Notice how it says that these are the feathers of the great birds that live in the upper air, which obviously alludes to the sky. It alludes to the heavens. The thunderbird is an important motif in Plains Indian cultures, and it basically symbolizes the power of the sky. It's a symbol of storm and rain and thunder and lightning, all the forces of nature that are beyond human control. And so, in wearing this headdress, the chief puts himself in a position to receive messages from the sky. He puts himself in a position to be a mediator between the people and the world above. At the same time, though, we have to remember that he has all these other ornaments, too: the claws of the mountain lion, the teeth of the wolf. And so he's not only a mediator with the spiritual world, he's also a fierce warrior. He is a dangerous person. And so there's this combination of the spiritual and the material that is represented in the ornaments and regalia of the chief. But let's continue reading. It goes on to say, these ornaments had been given to the chief by the master of the tribe. They were hereditary ornaments, belonging to the chiefs of the tribe since time immemorial. So here we have the idea of tradition. We have the continuity of culture. These are ornaments that have been passed down for generations. They belong to the chief. They are his by birthright. But at the same time, they also belong to the tribe. And so the chief is not only an individual person, he is also a symbol. He is a representation of something larger than himself. And that's really the way it is for any chief in any society, whether they are a chief of a tribe or a chief of a nation. When you become chief, you don't just represent yourself, you represent your people, you represent your nation. And that is something that you have to live up to. And so the idea of the chief as the representative of the sun is something that is really important in understanding the character of the protagonist of this story. Another thing that I thought was really interesting in this chapter is the fact that we have the idea of the chief as a judge. So before the trial begins, we are told that the chief sits in judgment, that he reviews all the evidence. He essentially acts as a jury, a judge, and an executioner. He's the one who ultimately decides what is going to happen. And that, again, goes back to the idea of the chief as the representative of the sun. The sun doesn't ask questions. The sun doesn't deliberate. The sun simply shines. The sun simply does what it is supposed to do. And in that sense, the chief is like the sun. He does not hesitate. He does not sit and ponder over what he's supposed to do. He knows what his duty is, and he fulfills it. I also think it's worth noting that in this scene we are told that all the chiefs are representatives of the great sun, that they are all linked to the spiritual world, that they are all mediators between the people and the cosmos. However, when it comes time for the trial, only one chief speaks. And that is significant because it tells us that although all the chiefs embody solar power, only one of them is actually doing anything. Only one of them is actually making decisions. And that, again, goes back to the idea of the chief as the representative of the sun. The sun doesn't ask questions. The sun doesn't deliberate. The sun simply shines. The sun simply does what it is supposed to do. And in that sense, the chief is like the sun. He does not hesitate. He does not sit and ponder over what he's supposed to do. He knows what his duty is, and he fulfills it. The last thing that I want to mention in this video is the fact that the entire book, the entire story takes place during a single winter. And so we are constantly reminded of the importance of time. Time is always passing. The sun is always moving through the sky. And that is something that the characters in the story are very aware of. They know that time is limited. They know that they have to make the most of the present moment. And that is something that we can all learn from. We can't waste time. We have to seize the moment. We have to do what we can to make the most of the opportunities that we are presented with. Okay, I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. And I will see you next time. Today, we're going to talk about Chapter 11, the spread of sun worship across the South. Now, when we think of the great mound centers of the Mississippi Valley, our minds often drift to Cahokia, and there's good reason for that, because it was large, sprawling, and enigmatic. But although it was huge, and quite possibly the largest pre-Columbian city in North America, it wasn't the only place where people built earthen mounds into massive geometric shapes. From the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico and far into the East Coast, Native Americans constructed earthen mounds that were shaped into circles, squares, triangles, and other patterns. In this episode, we are going to visit some of those places and see how their layouts differ from one another, and how they also share some surprising similarities. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and let's go back in time to the distant past. Before we get started, I want to remind you that if you enjoy learning about history, then be sure to subscribe for more content. We explore all sorts of historical topics here. If you enjoyed this episode, then give it a thumbs up, and leave us a comment with your thoughts, or ask any questions you might have. You can also check out previous episodes by clicking on the links in the description below. Let's begin. As we saw in previous episodes, Cahokia began around 650 AD, and flourished for almost 2 centuries. Its population peaked somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people. That would have been around the year 900 AD, then the town was largely abandoned after 1150 AD. But Cahokia wasn't the only big mound center in the South. Around the same time that Monk's Mound was being constructed, another large ceremonial mound was being built at a place called Etowah. Etowah is located near present-day Atlanta, Georgia, and was inhabited starting around the year 800 AD. This was nearly 1,000 miles away from Cahokia. The people who lived there spoke a Muskogean language and were likely related to the Creek and Seminole tribes that would later live in the area. They built enormous earthen temples, houses for their elite leaders, and burial mounds for their dead. Their town reached its peak around the year 1200 AD, and was then abandoned sometime afterward. At Etobicoke, there was a central platform mound, similar to Monk's Mound. It was surrounded by 4 smaller mounds, which formed a square around the main mound. In each of the 4 corners of the square were wooden temple structures. On top of the main mound, there was a large rectangular structure made from wood and thatch. Archaeologists believe that the leaders of the community lived in these grand houses. Although it is not entirely clear what role the temples on the smaller mounds had, it's believed that the central mound was used for religious ceremonies. Human remains found on top of the mound suggest that it may have been used as a burial site as well. The entire complex covered approximately 30 acres. When exploring Etowah, archaeologists discovered an assortment of artifacts, including tools, jewelry, and pottery. Some of the pottery was decorated with stamped designs, while others were Some of the motifs seen on the ceramics bear a striking resemblance to those seen on the artifacts found at Cahokia. While this could simply be a coincidence, there's a possibility that these 2 cultures shared some common symbols and ideas. One of the most fascinating things about Etowah is the astronomical observatory mound. This mound was built with a flat top and served as an observatory to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. The observatory mound is aligned with several other mounds in the complex. These alignments are thought to have been used to predict solstices and equinoxes. As we continue to travel east, we come to another major mound center known as Moundville. Like Etowah, Moundville was home to a large central mound that was used for religious ceremonies. However, the layout of the site differs significantly from other mound centers we have looked at so far. Moundville was never a sprawling metropolis like Cahokia, but instead it was a series of individual mounds connected by natural ravines. The central mound, sometimes referred to as the Great Sun Circle, consists of a large circular mound with 24 smaller mounds surrounding it. Each of the smaller mounds represents a different clan within the society. The central mound was probably used for communal rituals. Some researchers believe that the number, the 24th of May, have been significant to the people who lived here. It has been suggested that 24 hours in a day, 24 days in a month, and 24 moons in a year may have been important concepts to them. The 24 smaller mounds surrounding the central mound may have represented cycles of time. Other researchers have suggested that the design may represent constellations. Several miles away from Moundville are the remains of another culture that also revered the sun. The Spiro people lived along the Arkansas River in what is now eastern Oklahoma. By the year 900 AD, they had established a large trading network and were renowned for their skill in metalwork. Like the people at Etowah and Moundville, the Spiro people constructed platform mounds. They also built mounds in geometric shapes. At the center of their town was a plaza with 4 mounds forming a square around it. 2 of the mounds were nearly identical and faced each other across the plaza. The other 2 mounds were also similar and were located on either side of the plaza. A large temple structure was built on top of the central mound. Although the Spiro culture only lasted a couple of hundred years, their influence was widespread. Artifacts from Spiro have been found in Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Illinois, and Missouri. Much of what we know about the Spiro culture comes from the artifacts they left behind. They crafted beautiful copper and iron ornaments and jewelry. They also created intricately carved wooden masks. One such mask, known as the Spiro Mounds Man, was found buried in a ritual deposit. He wears a headdress that has 2 large copper suns protruding from the sides. This suggests that the sun played an important role in their culture. The next stop on our tour takes us to the coast of South Carolina, where we can find another impressive example of a Native American earthwork. The site is known as the Alligator, which I suppose is where they got the logo for the Carolina Panthers. The alligator effigy mound is shaped in the form of an alligator. To make the shape, the builders cut down trees and moved dirt and clay to form the body of the reptile. They then used sticks to form the tail and used cypress trees for the head. It's unclear exactly what role the alligator mound played in their society, but it's clear that it held great significance. It was not a burial mound, but small human remains were found at the base of the mound. It's possible that it may have been used during rituals. There's also a possibility that it was meant to intimidate their enemies. The alligator earthwork is part of a larger complex called the Francis Marion Earthworks. The complex consists of a variety of mounds and enclosures. Several miles away from the alligator is a large circular enclosure known as the Bradley Complex. Within the enclosure are 3 concentric rings of dirt and a large oval-shaped mound. The entire complex covers over 700 acres. Archaeologists believe that the Bradley Complex may have been used for ceremonial purposes and to settle disputes without violence. Another mysterious earthwork can be found just across the Savannah River in what is now Georgia. The Okmulgee earthworks is nearly 100 acres in size and consists of a large circular ditch and embankment. Researchers have suggested that it may have been used for burials, but no human remains have been found here. Some believe that it was used as a ceremonial site, while others think that it may have served as a defensive structure. Throughout the South, Native Americans built earthen mounds in unique shapes and patterns. Each mound center had its own distinct style and purpose. For example, the mounds at Poverty Point in Louisiana were built into cone shapes and arranged in a half circle. The people who built them lived in the area around 1700 BC and constructed 7 major mounds and dozens of smaller ones. What all of these mound centers seem to have in common is that they were all linked by a common reverence for the sun. Symbols of the sun and the moon can be found throughout the southeast, suggesting that celestial bodies played an important role in Native American culture. Sometime around the year 1500, the Mississippian culture emerged in the lower Mississippi Valley. The main difference between the Mississippian mounds and the earlier Hopewell mounds is that the Mississippian people built enormous platform mounds. The Mississippian culture lasted until around 1600 AD, but by that time, their towns had been largely abandoned. The Spaniards recorded the mounds in their journals, but they didn't conduct excavations. In the 1800s, explorers and adventurers began uncovering ancient artifacts and ruins. As interest in archaeology grew, more and more people began searching for ancient sites. During the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered a large copper plate inscribed with strange characters. They found it buried at the base of a statue in Ohio. As it turned out, it was neither a lost civilization nor a forgery. In reality, the mound builders weren't a mysterious lost civilization, but rather the ancestors of modern Native Americans. Unfortunately, much of their history has been lost to time. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about ancient history. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious. The Mississippi River is one of the longest rivers in North America. In fact, it's actually the second longest river in North America behind the Missouri River. However, by some measurements, including total length and volume of water, it is considered the largest river system in all of North America. It flows from north to south, starting in Minnesota, and empties into the Gulf of Mexico. For most of its length, the river flows through a region that was once home to thousands of mound builders. Today, there are few signs that they were ever there at all. Chapter 12: The Silence of the Mounds. In 1000 CE, the Mississippian culture thrived in what is now the Midwestern United States. They lived in cities that may have had as many as 20,000 inhabitants each. Their impressive architecture included massive earthen mounds that served both as burial grounds for their elite and platforms for important buildings like those of the rulers and priests. These people were the builders of huge earthen pyramids and the residents of great cities. But after 1300 CE, they vanished almost without a trace. In this time period, the old ways of life were ending across the globe. But the Mississippians weren't the only ones who disappeared. The Anasazi also faded away after building great structures in Chaco Canyon. And then there were the Khmer people who built the magnificent temples of Angkor. After 1400, these places were abandoned. One reason for this might be the shifting climate. Perhaps the weather changed so much that farming became impossible, or maybe warfare disrupted their way of life. Maybe disease struck them down, or perhaps there was some other kind of upheaval that no one really knows about. After 1300, There is very little archaeological evidence of the Mississippian people. Did they flee to other parts of the United States? Were they wiped out by disease or war? Or did the climate change so much that their way of life was no longer sustainable? We simply don't know. This mystery has fascinated me since I first read about it years ago. And today I want to share some of the possibilities with you. Welcome to my channel. As we look at the maps showing the Mississippian culture, we see an impressive network of settlements spread across several states. This map from the Missouri History Museum shows us the extent of the Mississippian culture in the year 1000 CE. As we can see, their territory extended across a large part of what is today the Midwestern United States. The area encompassed parts of present-day Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee, as well as portions of Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. At its peak, the Mississippian culture was characterized by large towns and villages. Cahokia was the largest city with an estimated population of between 10,000 and 20,000 people. Other major cities include the aptly named Mound near East St. Louis, the grand village of the Miriami people, which once housed around 5,000 people, and the bustling metropolis located along the Ohio River near Paducah, Kentucky. These urban centers were not just bustling metropolises, they were also hubs of religious activity. The Mississippians constructed multiple artificial mounds within their cities. Some of these mounds were used as burial grounds for their elite, while others served as platforms for important buildings such as those of the rulers and priests. One of the most notable examples of their architectural prowess is the Monk's Mound in present-day Missouri, rising 100 feet high and covering 14 acres. This enormous structure is the largest earthen mound in North America, and was likely used as a platform for a chief's residence, temple, or both. It was during this era that the Mississippian culture reached its zenith before it started to decline. By 1400 CE, the major population centers were abandoned. Entire cities were left to decay, and the grand mounds fell into disuse. Why did this happen? There isn't any one answer that can explain the disappearance of the Mississippian people. All we know for certain is that somewhere around 1300 CE, the people who built these mounds packed up and left. No doubt about it, something happened, but exactly what is up for debate. There are 4 possible answers. First, the changing climate. Second, an invasion by an outside group of people. Third, disease. And finally, internal strife. First, let's look at the idea of a changing climate. From 1000 to 1300 CE, the world began to cool significantly. This period, known as the Little Ice Age, would continue until roughly 1850 CE. Though the cooling was not uniform, it's possible that some areas experienced less rainfall and more cold weather, making farming more difficult. And yet, it's unlikely that climate alone caused the Mississippians to abandon their homes. Second, another possibility is that the Mississippian people were attacked by an outside group and forced to flee. For example, the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains are thought to have migrated into the Mississippi Valley around 1300 CE. Could they have been the aggressors who drove the Mississippians from their homelands? While it's possible, there's no evidence that they attacked the Mississippians or anyone else. In fact, there's nothing to suggest that they even had the military strength to do so. They were hunters and gatherers who lived on the Great Plains and simply moved into the Mississippi Valley. Thus, while it's a compelling idea, the available evidence does unsupport the theory that an outside group of people caused the Mississippian culture to collapse. Third, disease is always a good candidate when trying to explain the downfall of a civilization, and in this case, it does make some sense. Various pathogens could have swept through the Mississippian cities, wiping out huge swaths of the population and bringing down their society. But there's no evidence that any sort of plague devastated the Mississippians. That brings us to the final explanation for the collapse of the Mississippian culture: internal strife. Remember that the Mississippians were divided into smaller chiefdoms. Competition between these chiefdoms may have led to conflict that ultimately brought down the entire culture. The Mississippian chiefdoms were ruled by elites who controlled the trade networks and maintained the large public works projects. If there was a challenge to the authority of these elites, it could have caused a collapse in the social order. Unfortunately, we simply do and have enough evidence to say for sure why the Mississippian people abandoned their great cities. But the silence of the Mounds is deafening. It speaks to us across the centuries and asks us to consider what life was like for the people who built them. As we explore these abandoned mounds today, we can't help but wonder about the lives of those who once called them home. What were their days like? What did they eat? How did they govern themselves? And most importantly, why did they leave? Sadly, we may never know the answers to these questions. But we can marvel at the engineering feat of these ancient people as we stand in awe of the mounds that they built. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe. Click here to watch another video about the mysteries of the ancient world. Thanks for watching. Bye. The river is flowing, ever flowing to the sea. And as it flows, so does the sun across the face of the sky. Even after the last temple fell silent, even after the last fire died out, the sun still travels its eternal path. It climbs into the heavens each morning, tracing the arc of the year, gathering its strength from the light of the cosmos, then dipping below the horizon each evening to begin its journey anew. I have walked among the great works of the Mississippian people. I stood on the edges of their grand plazas and looked into the heavens through the archways of their temples, and all around me, the spirit of this place has whispered stories of a time when this valley rang with the voices of its builders. Now there is only silence. But the sun still moves across the sky, just as it did when the great city thrived. And so we come to the end of our journey here, or perhaps more accurately, we come full circle, for we have traced the path of the sun. We began our tale at sunrise over the Mississippi River. And though the course of many lives has changed since those first rays of light touched down on this ancient earth, the sun itself knows no change. It rises and sets over mountains and valleys, rivers and plains. It lights the way for all who travel beneath its gaze. It was thus for the people who built these mounds thousands of years ago, and it is thus still today. As we stand here together at the end of our story, let us remember that the sun will rise again tomorrow, just as it did before, and will do so until the end of time. When the first light touches down on the mounds, it will awaken the earth from its slumber, just as it did for the people who lived here long ago. They will stir and greet the day with songs and prayers and rituals, just as their ancestors did before them. And in the depths of the night, when the moon is high in the heavens and the shadows grow long, the spirits of this place will dance beneath the stars and keep watch over the sleeping world. Just as the sun is eternal, so too is the earth that cradles it. When we look out over these vast plains, we may feel a sense of loss for all that has been taken from this place. all that has been forgotten or left behind, but we must also remember that the earth is patient and enduring. It has weathered countless storms and endured the passage of countless years. And just as it has sustained life in the past, so will it continue to do so in the future. For the earth is not merely a collection of rocks and soil and water. It is a living, breathing entity that sustains all life. It is a source of nourishment and growth, a provider of shelter and sustenance. And above all, it is a constant reminder of the interconnectedness of all things. As we walk among the ruins of this ancient city, let us remember that we are connected to the earth in the same way as our ancestors were. Let us take a moment to feel the ground beneath our feet, to breathe in the air around us, to listen to the wind whispering through the grass. For in doing so, we are reminded of the power and majesty of the natural world and our place within it. I want to thank you for walking this path with me, for joining me on this journey through time and space. I hope that you have learned something new and gained a deeper appreciation for the Mississippian culture. But most of all, I hope that you have felt the wonder and awe that I have felt while exploring these ancient sites. For wonder and awe are the qualities that have inspired me to share the stories of this place with you. They are the reasons why I have dedicated my life to studying and preserving the legacy of the Mississippian people. When we approach the Temple of the Sun, we enter a realm where the boundaries between the earthly and the celestial become blurred. Here at the summit of the largest mound in the city, we are surrounded by the spirits of a people who lived over 1,000 years ago. They gathered here in the pre-dawn darkness and watched as the sun crested the distant hills and painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson. In those moments before the light touched down on the temple, they knew that they were part of something greater than themselves, that they were connected to the rhythms of the universe and the eternal cycle of day and night. In the stillness of this place, I have often heard the whispers of their voices, their hopes and dreams, their fears and struggles. I have seen the shadows of their bodies dancing in the morning light as they performed their rituals and ceremonies, and I have felt the warmth of their presence enveloping me like a blanket on a cold winter's night. As we stand here together at the edge of the temple, let us take a moment to listen to the sounds of the wind rustling through the grass, the birds singing overhead, the trees swaying in the distance. For in these sounds, we can hear the echoes of the past. We can hear the voices of the people who lived here long ago, and as we listen, let us open our hearts and minds to the possibility that we are connected to them in ways that we cannot yet imagine. Let us also take a moment to look up at the sky. Above us, the sun climbs higher and higher, casting its golden light over the horizon. And as we watch, let us remember that the sun is eternal. It will rise again tomorrow and the next day and the next, just as it did before the dawn of human history and will do so until the end of time. The sun is the source of all life on earth. It is the giver of warmth and light. It is the guide of seasons and the ruler of days. The sun is the heartbeat of the earth, the pulse of the planet that sustains all life. It is the rhythm of the universe, the melody of the cosmos that binds all things together. And here at the Temple of the Sun, we are reminded of the sacredness of this celestial body. We are reminded that the sun is not just a ball of burning gas, but a source of life, a giver of light, and a beacon of hope. I invite you to close your eyes and feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, to breathe in the scent of the earth, to listen to the sound of the wind in the trees. And as you do so, let us remember that we are part of something greater than ourselves, that we are connected to the earth and the sun and the universe in ways that we cannot yet understand. This is the last stop on our journey through time, and I hope it has been an adventure for you. I know it has been for me. If you have enjoyed our exploration of the Mississippian culture, I encourage you to continue learning about the indigenous peoples of North America. There are so many stories to discover and so much history to uncover. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking knowledge. Before we say our final farewells, let us take a moment to reflect on what we have learned along the way. We have discovered the resilience and adaptability of the indigenous peoples who thrived in this region for centuries. We have marveled at their sophisticated societies and their deep understanding of the natural world. And we have witnessed the ingenuity and artistry of a culture that flourished without the use of metal tools. But perhaps, most importantly, we have learned that the Mississippian people were not a monolithic or unchanging culture, but a dynamic and evolving society that adapted to the challenges and opportunities presented by their environment and the wider world. Through their ingenuity and adaptability, they created a thriving culture that lasted for centuries. Their achievements in agriculture, architecture, and art continue to inspire awe and wonder today. And their legacy lives on in the cultures and traditions of the Native American nations that descended from them. As we gather here today, let us remember that the Mississippian people were not just ancient relics of the past, but vital threads in the fabric of American history. Their story is an integral part of the tapestry that has shaped our nation, and their contributions should be celebrated and honored. I hope that our journey through time has deepened your appreciation for the rich and complex history of the indigenous peoples of North America. As you continue your exploration of this fascinating subject, I encourage you to approach it with humility, curiosity, and respect. Remember that the stories of these cultures are not just historical tales, but living legacies that continue to shape our world today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. I have been your guide, and I invite you to continue exploring the wonders of the ancient world. Until next time, may the spirits of the Mississippian people guide you on your path, and may the wisdom of the ages illuminate your way.